We talk a lot about narcissism, but there's another term that used to be very, very popular that's dropped off the map. I'm going to put it back on the map, which is egomania. I'll get people who come to me and say, is my partner narcissistic? Am I narcissistic? Excuse me. And I think one of the problems is once we say narcissism, people like using the word. They like how it feels in their mouths. They like to hear themselves say narcissism. My ex-partner is a narcissist, and they just love the way that sounds. Why? Probably because it sounds kind of clinical, and we live in an age of psychologization, and if you can use psychology terms, you just sound really clever. And then you say to them, oh, which of the 9 diagnostic criteria do they hit for narcissism? And they'll be like, no, he's just a duck. And you're like, that's not narcissism. Somebody is perfectly capable of being an absolute dick of the maximum order and not having a fairly rare clinical diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder. Most of the people who are being called narcissists, they're just not very kind, not very mature, not very humble, not very socially aware people. And I think narcissism is like a switch off word. So if I say narcissist, because I really don't know what it means, it's like a bin that I can just, a trash can for the American viewers, that I can just throw stuff in and go, well, my ex said this and my ex did this, but it doesn't matter because she's a narcissist. So immediately, by using that word, I've absolved myself of any guilt or wrongdoing, because narcissist has become a slur and an insult. If you're a narcissist, you're the embodiment of evil. If my ex-girlfriend is the embodiment of evil, I don't have to think about anything that I did. I just be like, well, she's just a narcissist and that's it. It's a switch off word. It's also an F off word. It's a shut up word. You're a narcissist, shut up. You're a narcissist, I switch off. You're a narcissist, I could just reject. Any criticism you had of me, any negative feedback, I can absolutely just reject it. But if we use ego, I think that's easier for people to get their heads around, which makes me suspicious why we're not using it, because we used to say egomania. The other thing that I'm suspicious of is you could see people who are very, very egotistical, and that's, one's visible and one's invisible. They're very, very egotistical and they love using the word narcissism. Now, here we go. So, why is narcissism invisible? Because it is a clinical diagnosis. Well, narcissistic personality disorder is a clinical diagnosis. It's not easy to understand. According to the ICD-10, I use the American Psychiatric Association Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. There are these 9 diagnostic criteria, and inside of a clinical setting, you need to hit 6 of them. Okay. They're not necessarily all that easy to see, and really what they are is like an equally weighted shopping list of annoying behaviors. They have a haughty demeanor, annoying. They lie a lot, annoying. They insist that the normal rules don't apply to them, annoying. Interpersonally exploitative, annoying. They're attached to a delusional, grandiose version of themselves, annoying. And you kind of go, well, that's not really a description of what say if I'm a psychiatrist and that's a patient. I'm not a psychiatrist, I don't have patients. I have 0 patients, lol. What am I describing about the client's internal world? What am I describing about the client's experience subjectively? Nothing. There's nothing in the diagnostic criteria that describes what they're going through. 0, nothing, 0. Really 0? Yes, really 0. In the American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, that the psychiatrists who are, by the way, a psychiatrist is a doctor. That's a full medical doctor. That's 9 years of studying. There isn't anything in the diagnostic criteria that describes the patient's subjective reality. Nothing. Nothing. These are externally perceived patterns of behavior. That's not a pattern of perception. It's a pattern of behavior that happens to be quite irritating. Like all of the 9 diagnostic criteria are very, very annoying habits. And you might think, that sounds a bit shady. Okay, but it is what it is. So most people that I speak to about this, they don't know that. They're like, oh, wow, is that really what narcissism is? Yeah. Is that really how it's diagnosed? Yeah, that's really how it's diagnosed. How could that be? So some people, smart people go, how's that a description of a genuine mental health disorder? How's that a clinical description? And I'll go, it isn't. I'm not smart. It's 2025. That argument against a clinical diagnosis for MPD, I can trace it back at least to the year 2000. That criticism of MPD as a diagnostic structure, at least to the year 2000. That's 25 years. That's a quarter of a century. People have been arguing about that, going, you can't use that. But here we are. So even within psychiatry, it's not a settled issue. It's not settled science. It's a contentious description. Psychiatrists are watching these YouTube videos. I have psychiatrists coming to my effing seminars and psychiatrists sending me emails. I'm a YouTuber. And they'll be like, well, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And I'm going, I don't know. You're the one with a medical degree. What do you say? And they're like, well, I don't know. The people, they're human beings. In case you weren't certain of it, psychiatrists are human too. Psychotherapists also apparently human. The people who form the committees that decide on these diagnostic criteria or decide whether a clinical entity exists or not are human beings. So why is all of this a problem? Because I think it makes the visibility and the capacity to tie down what narcissism is and isn't very slippery, very, very slippery. But egotism, I don't think is slippery. Egotism, so narcissism is kind of like, well, it's grandiose and slightly delusional, ironically enough. The clinical diagnosis is grandiose and is infected with delusion. Because, as I've just said, you can't be like, my patient keeps interrupting me, never says please and thank you, burps and farts when they speak, has no personal and therefore they have a personality disorder. You can't, I'm being silly, but you can't just list annoying things a person does and go, that's a clinical disorder. Well, maybe they're just an irritating human being. I've made my point. And it's fancy language. It's psychiatric language. It makes me sound like I just really understand psychotherapy. That's called psychologization. Psychologization is when things that belong in the realm of psychology have leaked out into the real world where they don't belong. There are patterns of behavior, there's a worldview, there are terms that are very meaningful. And I'm a staunch defender of psychotherapy. Psychotherapy is a good thing. The idea of safe spaces and no judgment and even putting morality to one side is all good within the psychotherapeutic space. You take that and take it out into the real world, it can be radioactively poisonous. It doesn't work outside in the real world. There's a layman's term, which is egomania. I don't know, people used to use it up until the 90s probably. Maybe somebody can check that. I haven't heard it much. You know when somebody has a big ego. So somebody with a big ego is somebody who is very attached to the story of them. Somebody who has a big ego is frequently advertising their sort of personal brand. You know, the thing is with a guy like me, I'm just really decisive. I'm just, and all this crap that they force you to listen to that's incredibly boring. Egomania is when somebody's ego has kind of, in a way, possessed them. So we have the word mania. This is old-fashioned psychiatric language. And being manic. So they've become obsessed, and it's like they're drawing energy from their own ego. Their libidinous energy has plugged back into itself where it doesn't belong. And now they're excited by their own ego. They're excited by the story of who they are. The word, I always like telling people this because it makes me sound clever. The word in Sanskrit for ego, or the word that is used in the Buddhist text that we translate as ego, and in the Hindu texts, is ahamkara. Ahamkara. So we've translated that as ego, which is a really, really crap translation, but we don't have a word for it. The ahamkara is it kind of has a function, and the function is to make a story of the self. So what we just call it ego, but in Sanskrit, there's a part of you whose function is to create a self story. It's constantly making up a story of the self, which I think is pretty cool. It's a pretty cool way of looking at it. When you have somebody who is just talking about themselves all the time, you would say that's an egotistical person. They don't take feedback well because they're so egotistical. They reject feedback. They are hyper-competitive because they need to be first. They're egotistical. They have egomania. They frequently are advertising and marketing their superiority. There's a pattern of behavior I've noticed, and God help me. I noticed this when I was running seminars on narcissism, and I was doing, like meetup groups on narcissism. And for every 20 people who would come, you would get one person who was engaging in this particular, it was annoying. It was an annoying pattern of behavior. And it wasn't just annoying me, it was annoying the people who were there as well. And I'd think, okay, don't get annoyed. Go into psychologist mode. So I'd be like, stroking my chin. I'm in psychologist mode. What's happening here? And I would say to myself, this person is constantly saying things that lets everybody else know that they're very strong. This person is constantly saying things that lets people around them know that they're very, very capable. And I even started challenging people. I'd be like, do you know that when you speak, every third sentence is an advert for your strengths and your capability? No, it isn't. No, it isn't. I'm the type of person who wouldn't add, see, now you're doing it again. You're not talking, you're propagandizing, you're advertising. I am very keen that you all see me in the way that I wish to be seen. That's egomania. That's a kind of egomania. So you'd have somebody who'd sat there going, I'm the victim of narcissistic abuse. I am the victim of narcissistic abuse. But you know what? I showed them, they thought they could get me, but I did this and I beat them up psychically, and I'm very clever and I'm very powerful and I'm very strong. And people would be like me. They're just nice, polite people, but they'd get wound up eventually. And they were getting annoyed. And I'd be like, what is that? So your story is you are the victim. That's how you've begun the story, but the story ends with, but in the end I was the victor. And these groups were usually run with strangers. Not since Kuala Lumpur, which is like 2015, that's 10 years ago, God help me, have I run a group that's been consistent across like 10 weeks. They're usually one-off groups. So this person is coming to strangers and saying, I was the victim of narcissistic abuse, but eventually I won. And I'd be like, I would jokingly sort of chide them and be like, so is the point of that story that you're the winner? They go, no. I'm like, you did just say that. That is egomania. Now, I don't know about you, but the way I feel about this is it's almost like I can sink my teeth into ego. I can sink my teeth into egomania. Narcissism, because it's poorly defined to begin with, and it's hotly contended, and it's becoming this weird, well, first of all, it's a slur, but it's also a shutdown word. It's just absolute. It's like, they were a narcissist and that is final. No more. And you go, oh, you're not even allowed to question it. You'll notice this. If you go to seminars or meetup groups, you'll notice it. If you say, well, I don't recommend doing it, but if you're feeling brave, if you say, are you sure that person was a narcissist? You can get very short shrift. You can get a very grumpy reply. It's almost as though cult-like coordinates are developing here, or have developed. And it's not within the rules of the game to say to somebody, your partner sounds like they had a problem with alcohol, not narcissism. Your partner sounds like they were just very selfish, not narcissistic. Or your partner had mental health disorder, ABC. I mean, it's known in the literature, there are other disorders people can have that even trick clinicians. Two off the top of my head, I was reading literature about this. I don't read literature often, so don't be deceived into thinking I'm on Google Scholar all the time, but occasionally I go on. This is about 6 months ago. Bipolar. Bipolar is frequently misdiagnosed as narcissism. And another one is something called obsessive compulsive personality disorder that nobody in the online space is talking about, which is really weird. Even the psychiatrists and psychotherapists in the online space aren't talking about it. But it's OCD-PD. Now, if you have OCD, that doesn't, apparently, I'm not an expert, I haven't read the literature on this, but it was clear from what I was reading, they wanted to be very, very clear on this. If you have been diagnosed with OCD, that has very little to do with OCD-PD. That doesn't show up like that. OCD-PD is to somebody outside of the disorder observing it, could look like the haughty, controlling, bullying demeanor of narcissistic personality disorder. So there's two right off the bat, bipolar and OCPD. They can look like narcissism. So it's contested. But over here, if we just say egomania, this person's ego is completely out of control, or this person, look, if somebody is very egotistical, how do you know? How do you know? Like off the top of your head. They're not really listening to you. They're talking more than they're listening. They dominate every conversation. They're advertising who they are and how brilliant and how clever and how strong and how victorious they are. When the conversation moves away from them, they become bored or agitated. So I've seen people just get up and effing leave. This happened recently at a social, I'm in Prague right now, and Czech people as a generalization are very polite compared to say Brits or Americans. And this person sat there and held court for 25 minutes. They were not Czech. Listen to Czechs who speak English and made these polite Czech people listen to their effing boring story for 25 minutes. And the first Czech, the conversation was all in English, who changed the subject to them, this person, they were like, well, this is no longer about me, got up and left. I was like, you have to pay back, homie. You can't leave. You made us listen to your boring story. Now you have to, that's how adult interaction. You can't just be like, well, I dumped my story here. I guess I'll go into the other room and dump it again to a fresh batch of people. It's like, it doesn't work like that. You can do that, of course, but then you might find you're not invited to as many parties in the future and people don't want to hang around with you as much. Egomania, I feel like we might be at a point where it might be more useful to just say this person was egomaniacal. I just want to finish with one thing. If your decision tree on whether to leave a relationship or whether to abandon a relationship or not is a positive diagnosis of MPD, like I just got to know, like once I know they have MPD, I can just give up and I can leave. You're even clinically, this is the one controversial thing I'll say, or maybe psychotherapists, psychiatrists will get angry with me. Even clinically, you're chasing a mirage. You're chasing a mirage. Nobody really knows. Nobody can know. They could pull an NPD in, give them a truth serum and make them do a test, and you might not get a positive result on that test. You might not. It's not perfect. Let it go. Create different boundaries. That's a boundary that's an external locus of control. You're like, I need a clinician to tell me this person has MPD, then I can get on with my life. Forget that. You set your own standards. If somebody's consistently disrespecting your boundaries, if somebody is consistently lying to you, if they're doing things that hurt you, if their values clearly don't align with your own, that's the boundary tripwire at which you say, okay, that's enough. Not this poorly defined, highly contentious personality disorder. Don't let that be the boundary after which you say, okay, I'm going to give up on the relationship. Do it your own way. I think egomania, if you could see somebody as egomaniacal and they are egomaniacal in a way that doesn't take feedback and is quite sadistic, if the relation, look, let's keep it really simple. If relating to that person or eating that ice cream or drinking that drink is making you sick, don't eat that flavor ice cream, don't drink that drink, and don't hang out with that person anymore. Because life is short on this planet. It's making you sick. Let it go. If you're interested in recovering from narcissistic abuse, if you're interested in getting over these superego injunctions and the narcissistic shared fantasy space once and for all, we have a package for you. It's the Fast Track Recovery from Narcissistic Abuse, where I give you everything that I know that is the most up-to-date information that I have. It's across 4 videos. There's not much theory. It's directive advice as to this is what you need to do now if you want to overcome a narcissistically abusive relationship and never get into another one in the future. I highly recommend that you do that in conjunction with the 30-day protocol that we have. This eradicates the shared fantasy space and it gives you the tools you need to recognize the narcissistic voice inside your head, those narcissistic superego injunctions, to identify them, to resist them, and to change them to give you an intention and an outcome that you want. If you want to get a hold of that course, you can click the link here and it's available to start now. You own it for life. If you want to do it in a community and follow it day by day, we begin at the 1st of next month. If you want to do it in your own time, you're welcome to do that too. Ladies and gents, thank you for your time and for your attention. I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thank you.